On November 1st, 1396, St. Paul's Cathedral in London glowed with the soft light of hundreds of flickering candles. The rich sound of the organ echoed through the vast space as a royal procession made its way slowly down the aisle. At its center was 6-year-old Isabel of France, draped in golden silk so heavy they nearly overwhelmed her small frame. Though just a child, she was about to become Queen of England. Her marriage to 29-year-old King Richard II marked not only a personal union, but a powerful political alliance, one that would shape the future of both England and France. In the shadow of royal madness, Isabel of France's fate was set long before she walked down the aisle to marry King Richard II. Born on November 9th, 1389, at the Louvre Palace, she was the fourth daughter of King Charles VI and Isabeau of Bavaria. Her father, later known as Charles the Mad, suffered from terrifying bouts of insanity. At times, he failed to recognize his own wife and children. He believed his body was made of glass and could shatter with a single touch. While France was once a powerful kingdom, it was now ruled by regents vying for control, as the true king remained a prisoner of his fractured mind. Isabel's mother, Queen Isabeau, was cold and calculating, more interested in preserving her power and privileges than in caring for her children. Contemporary chroniclers describe her as a woman absorbed in courtly affairs and personal ambition, treating her daughters not as beloved children, but as pieces in the dangerous game of dynastic politics. Isabel's early years were marked by turmoil, shifting alliances, bitter feuds, and the ever-present specter of war and betrayal. Growing up during the chaos of the 100 Years' War and the bitter feud between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, Isabel witnessed the unraveling of both her family and her nation. She saw her father's mind slip further into darkness and her mother's heart grow ever colder. These experiences left deep emotional wounds on a sensitive, intelligent girl who had little say in the life being shaped for her. Caught in the heart of political chaos, Isabel was soon chosen to seal a fragile peace between France and England through marriage. But even before the vows were spoken, her destiny had already been decided, written in the instability of her time and the tragedy of her lineage.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching.
In 1396, just 6 years old, Isabel of France became a casualty of royal diplomacy, a child offered up in the pursuit of political gain. After years of brutal war with France, England's King Richard II sought a truce to strengthen his fragile rule. Recently widowed after the death of Anne of Bohemia, Richard was not only grieving, but also in desperate need of a new alliance, one that could bring both peace and money to a kingdom stretched thin. The French court, led by the Duke of Berry, saw an opportunity. A proposal was made. Isabel would marry Richard, and in return, France would offer a massive dowry of £800,000 and a 28-year truce. For two countries drained by conflict, it was an appealing bargain. But beneath the polished language of diplomacy lay a grim truth. This agreement came at the expense of a little girl's childhood. Months of negotiations followed, marked by a chilling detachment. Envoys on both sides spoke of Isabel not as a daughter or a person, but as a diplomatic asset. Her youth became a sticking point. Some of Richard's advisors urged patience, suggesting the marriage be delayed until she was at least 12. But Richard, under pressure to secure his throne and ease his financial troubles, insisted the wedding proceed without delay. By October 1396, the treaty was finalized. Isabel, still clinging to dolls and nursery songs, was sent across the Channel to become Queen of England. In the grand halls of power, her future was decided not by love or care, but by politics and pragmatism. That single decision, born from desperation and ambition, would change her life forever and leave a mark on history written in sorrow. At just 6 years old, Isabel of France was thrust into the heart of royal politics, her childhood traded for diplomacy. Her departure from France was staged as a grand affair, designed to impress the English envoys rather than to comfort a little girl leaving everything she knew behind. At the Louvre Palace, her father, King Charles VI, blessed her with tears in his eyes during one of his rare lucid moments. Her mother, Isabeau of Bavaria, remained cold and detached, treating the farewell more like a political formality than a personal loss. To young Isabel, the journey felt like an adventure, a temporary visit to a distant land, not the beginning of a lifelong sacrifice. She packed only a few of her favorite dolls and a small lapdog, unaware that she was leaving behind her home, her family, and her innocence. The French delegation escorting her to England was lavish and immense. Hundreds of nobles, attendants, and soldiers accompanied the young princess, an entourage meant to protect not just her safety, but her symbolic value. Isabel was, after all, a royal treasure, both because of her age and her enormous dowry. The trip from Calais to London stretched over weeks. Along the way, English towns competed to host the most elaborate receptions, hoping to dazzle the child bride with displays of loyalty and opulence. But for all the fanfare, Isabel often cried, overwhelmed by the crowds, the noise, and the weight of a role she didn't understand. More than once, she asked quietly if she could go back home. When they finally arrived in London, King Richard II spared no effort in preparing a royal wedding unlike any other. St. Paul's Cathedral was transformed, draped in fine cloths of both English and French make. Thousands of candles, imported from France, bathed the space in golden light. Latin and French hymns filled the air, creating an atmosphere that was both majestic and alien. The ceremony was a political performance, more spectacle than celebration, designed to showcase the peace forged between two rival kingdoms. Richard II, at 29, was considered one of the most cultured monarchs in Europe. Still grieving the loss of his beloved first wife, Anne of Bohemia, he felt deeply uncomfortable marrying a child. But political necessity outweighed personal feelings. To his credit, he treated Isabel with kindness and respect, not as a wife, but more like a cherished ward. During the ceremony, Isabel said nothing. She stood frozen, her small hand trembling as the Archbishop of Canterbury knelt to place a ring on her finger. Her wide eyes searched the crowd for a familiar face. There were none. At court, Isabel was sheltered, given her own apartments at Westminster, a private manor, and a staff devoted to her care. Richard ensured she had French-speaking tutors and allowed her to preserve many of her native customs. For a time, she lived in relative comfort, protected by the very youth that had made her so politically valuable. But peace was fragile, and so was her world. In September 1399, everything fell apart. Richard II was deposed by Henry Bolingbroke, who seized the throne as Henry IV. Richard was imprisoned and later murdered at Pontefract Castle. Just 10 years old, Isabel became a widow, without ever having truly been a wife. Her position became a political problem. She was still the queen in title, yet her marriage had never been consummated and produced no heirs. Even worse, the colossal dowry France had paid was already spent. Returning Isabel meant returning a fortune England no longer possessed. To avoid this, Henry IV kept her under house arrest at Havering Castle. Though she lived in relative comfort, she was a prisoner in all but name, a valuable piece in future diplomatic bargaining. Isabel spent 3 long years in captivity, writing desperate letters home. In one heartbreaking plea to her father, Charles VI, she wrote, "I write to you in tears, for I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, without hope of return." Her words revealed a girl forced to grow up far too soon, burdened by grief, loneliness, and the cruel weight of royal duty. Eventually, her cries reached her father. In a rare moment of clarity, King Charles VI demanded her release. In 1401, Isabel was finally allowed to return to France. But the girl who came home was no longer the innocent child who had once left with her dolls and her dog. She had been used, forgotten, and shaped by the cold machinery of royal power. Though she was free, her life would never be the same. She had played her part in a political game that cost her far more than anyone could see, and carried scars that never truly healed. In 1401, after years of tense diplomacy and emotional pleas, Isabel of France was finally allowed to return home. But the reunion was far from the joyful homecoming she had once imagined. The little girl who had left Paris at 6 returned as a quiet, withdrawn 12-year-old, scarred by loss and exile. Her family, preoccupied with political turmoil, greeted her not with warmth, but with indifference, viewing her more as a diplomatic complication than a cherished daughter. Yet Isabel's trials were far from over. In 1405, at the age of 16, her mother arranged a second marriage, this time to Charles of Orléans, a young nobleman and gifted poet. Unlike her first union, this marriage offered Isabel something she had never known before: affection. Charles was gentle, thoughtful, and shared her love of poetry and the arts. In him, Isabel found not just a husband but a kindred spirit. For the first time, she experienced real companionship, A rare light in a life so often defined by sorrow. But happiness, as always in Isabel's story, proved fleeting. In 1407, Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt and taken to England as a prisoner. He would remain in captivity for 25 years. Isabel, once again left alone, was widowed in all but name. With her husband gone and her place at court uncertain, she fell back into a quiet existence, relying on the goodwill of the royal family for shelter and support. In the years that followed, Isabel withdrew from the political spotlight and turned her attention to charity, patronage of the arts, and private counsel. Her painful experiences as England's child queen had given her a sharp, intuitive understanding of court politics, and she used this knowledge quietly to advise trusted members of the French court. In 1409, she gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Joan of Orleans. Motherhood brought her a measure of comfort, but also a deep, private sadness. Looking at her daughter, Isabel feared that Joan too would be swept into the same web of political games that had defined and nearly destroyed her own life. Though she had been born a princess and crowned a queen, Isabel's life was shaped not by power, but by survival. And in the end, perhaps her greatest legacy was the quiet strength with which she endured it all. Isabel of France's life stands as a haunting testament to the cost of political ambition. Born into a world where royal diplomacy mattered more than personal happiness, she was sacrificed to power games before she even understood them. At just 6 years old, she was handed over in marriage to secure peace between France and England, used as a bargaining chip in a treaty, not as a daughter with dreams of her own. Widowed by 10, imprisoned by 12, and remarried at 16 for political expedience, Isabel's life was a chain of transactions in which her own voice was rarely, if ever, heard. At 18, her second husband, Charles of Orleans, was captured by the English at Agincourt and imprisoned, leaving her alone once more. Just 2 years later, in 1409, Isabel died at the age of 20 from complications following childbirth. Her passing, quiet and largely unremarked in the chronicles of the time, stood in stark contrast to the elaborate pageantry that had surrounded her childhood wedding. A life that had once symbolized peace between nations ended in silence. Isabel fulfilled the role expected of her. She bridged kingdoms, sealed alliances, and played her part in the theater of royal diplomacy. But she never truly lived for herself. Her life raises painful questions about the role of women, and especially young girls, in medieval politics. Daughters of nobility were often treated as currency, bartered to strengthen power and secure treaties. Their lives were not their own, and Isabel's story is one of the clearest examples of that cruel reality. She never had the chance to be a child. From the moment she was chosen to become Queen of England, the weight of adult responsibilities was forced upon her small shoulders. Her story is one of endurance, of a young girl who carried the burden of nations, while her own needs and hopes were ignored. Isabel of France remains a powerful symbol of how innocence was too often sacrificed on the altar of politics. Behind every treaty and royal alliance lies a human cost, and in Isabel's case, it was a childhood lost, a life constrained, and a legacy shaped by sorrow. Her story reminds us of the silent victims of power, the children who paid the highest price for the ambitions of others.